All right, so this lecture covers APA citations and ethical writing. I'm shifting around the way I teach APA a little bit, and so we're going to try to just cover the pieces that you need for the stage you're at. So we'll see how this goes. But at this point, you should have found your references. And so one of the first things you need to do is start working on a reference list. So your references are a list of works that you have referred to in your paper. So it's not a works cited. It's not a list of any article you ever pulled. It is a list of the things that you have actually cited in your paper. When you go to format your list should start on a new page, and I'll show you exactly what this looks like. But again, I want to reiterate that you should be using academic references for this paper, peer-reviewed journals, or published books. But again, I expect most of your resources to be journals. Wikipedia, personal web pages, those are not academic sources. So generally the strategy that you need to use is first identify the type of source that it is. Is it a journal article? Is it a web page? Is it a book? Again, most of your sources will be journal articles. Then you want to find an example of that type of source. So the APA style guide online is a great example. You can look in your APA manual if you have it. You can look on Purdue OWL. But the simplest thing is to find a correctly cited example and mirror that sample. And so once you've done that for each of your references, you'll fill out the important information in the same format. So paying attention to where the author's last name is placed, what's in quotes, what's italicized, where there's punctuation, things like that. And then order your list in alphabetical order by the first author's last name. And this is important. I just want to note you never rearrange the order of the authors. When you publish a paper, the order of the authors are determined by how much work gets put in. So you don't alphabetize the order of the authors within the article. You always keep the order within the article, but when you have 10 articles, you place them in alphabetical order by the first author's last name across articles. Okay, so this is generally what your reference page should look like. At the top, you should have the word references centered. The entire thing will be double spaced. Another thing to note is the first line of each entry is flush left, and then subsequent lines are indented. And again, you're going to alphabetize by the first author's last name. Okay, so these are some examples that you can use for journal articles. And again, this will be the format most of your citations. Note that this is slightly incorrect because I just used the bullet points in PowerPoint, but of course, the first line should be flush left, everything else should be indented. So if you have one author, you have the author's last name, abbreviations for the middle and the first and middle name. The year goes in parentheses. Title of the article, note that the only thing capitalized in the title of the article is the first word after a colon, and any proper nouns, names, places, things like that also get capitalized. The title of the journal is Psychology and Aging. In the title of the journal, any big word is capitalized. Anything over 3 letters should be capitalized. Note that it should be italicized. And then you have a comma, the volume, the issue, another comma, and the page numbers with no P. And then you have the DOI. And in the latest edition of APA 7, it really wants the DOI to be a hyperlink. So this is what it should look like. You can find this information on EBSCO, or it may also be on your actual article as well. I do want to note that EBSCO has a function that it can export the article citation in APA format, and it is almost always wrong. So I really recommend that you just not use it and do it by hand. If you're going to use it, you need to go through and check every one of these things, the capitalization, italics, that there's no P for page number, the author's names, all of these things need to be checked very carefully if you're going to use some other kind of automatic formatting, because I can almost always tell. Okay, if you have 2 authors, there's an ampersand between the author's name, but same thing. Notice the capitalization in the article title. The journal title, again, gets the big words capitalized and is in italics. It's hard to tell when you're looking at it, but the volume number also goes in italics. So this number right here is the volume. It goes in italics. The issue number in parentheses does not need to. Page numbers don't go in italics. Then we've got the DOI. And if you have multiple authors, you have commas until you get to the last one. Okay, this is an example of books. One big change from APA 7 is you no longer need to list the place of publications for books. And again, if you have a book or a chapter in an edited book, you could potentially have one of those, find an example and copy it. Okay. I often have students who are citing the DSM in their paper, and this is kind of a special case. So in the references list, this is what your DSM citation should look like. In an in-text citation, you are citing the American Psychiatric Association, comma, 2013. Okay, so here I just wanted to take a second, have you pause the video and think about, when I say ethical writing, what do I need? What do you know about when you need to cite a source? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but I just want to kind of get a sense of how much you know. How do you define plagiarism? When do you need to cite a source? And what can you do to avoid plagiarism? Okay, so I've got a really great example here of how this is also on Moodle, but this is a pretty complicated PDF, but I encourage you to go through on Moodle and walk through. There's a lot of different types of plagiarism. Some are more severe, some are less severe, but you can start with this in this infographic and kind of work your way through thinking about things like, are you confident that your ideas are your own, or did they come from someone else? Did you give credit to all of the author's material? Did you cite anything in quotes? Things like that. So I encourage you to look through this very carefully because it's a really great resource for you to be using. Okay, so back to our PowerPoint here. So ethical writing is really when we say ethical writing, we're talking about plagiarism. So plagiarism is using other people's ideas and words without clearly acknowledging the source of information. Now, in college, a lot of what you're doing is engaging with other people's ideas through texts and literature and discussion, incorporating them into your own writing. And so it's really important that we give credit where credit is due. So when we talk about ethical writing, we're talking about how we give credit to other people for their ideas. And plagiarism is basically not giving people credit for their ideas. So some general terms that are kind of important to know. Common knowledge is generally known information. And so these things you don't necessarily have to document. The year John F. Kennedy was elected as president, things like that. You need to document facts that are not generally known or ideas that are really interpretation of facts. Next, quotations. Direct quotations are using someone else's words verbatim. And so if you are using a direct quote, you place the passage in quotation marks and you need to cite the authors, the year, and the page number. This is extremely rarely used in psychology. Students tend to really want to cite or to use direct quotes a lot. Notice as you're reading your articles, we almost never use direct quotes in psychology. So you should really try to avoid using them. Instead, what you should be doing is paraphrasing, using someone else's ideas and putting them in your own words. Now, this is what's most commonly used. Even when you paraphrase, you still have to acknowledge the source, right? You have to give them credit for the ideas, even if you're putting the ideas in your own words. You still need to tell people where they came from. Okay, so I've got a couple of examples here that you can pause the video for them, read the original, and then read the writer's summary of it or how the writer incorporated it. So in this one, I would say that this writer has only changed around a few words or phrases or kind of changed the order of the original sentence. They didn't cite the source in any way for any of the ideas or facts. So I would call this plagiarism. Okay, here's another one. And again, pause the video, same original source, different summary. Okay, so in this one, the author accurately relays the information from the original. She uses her own words, but she also lets her reader know the source of information. So she's done a really good job of paraphrasing and still citing the source. And here's a third one, same source, different writer summarizing this. This writer has also done a pretty good job giving credit for their ideas from the passage. They did take some wording directly from the passage, but they indicated that by using quotation marks. And they cite the authors, the year, and the page number, which is correct. So when you're writing, you need to make sure you give credit whenever you use another person's ideas, opinions, or theories. If you use any facts or statistics or graphs or knowledge or drawings, anything that's not common knowledge, you cite a percentage that was found in a specific study, all those things need citations. If you use direct quotations of another person's actual spoken or written words, or if you paraphrase another person's spoken or written words, always put a citation. So even if you're paraphrasing, you need to cite your source. And sometimes it's can be tempting as you're paraphrasing to get dangerously close to the original phrasing. So a couple of things that can kind of help you avoid plagiarism and make sure you know where your ideas came from. As you're reading and taking notes, which we're going to do in the next few weeks, make sure you connect your notes to the source. Now you're starting to read your articles now, you're going to be submitting your paper in 2 or 3 months from now. It might seem obvious now where it came from, but you might not necessarily remember several months later. You need to be really diligent when you take your notes to connect your notes to the specific source. We'll talk about some strategies of how to do this later, but put anything that comes directly from the text in quotations. But the better strategy to avoid this altogether is to paraphrase while you're taking notes. So do the effort and paraphrase now as you're reading and taking notes, put it in your own words, but include the source. And then when you're writing, write from your notes, but paraphrase again. So this means you're 2 steps away from the original source and you're much less likely to be tempted to paraphrase. A good strategy as you're paraphrasing is to kind of make sure you're not just rearranging or replacing a few words. A good strategy is to read what you want to paraphrase carefully. So read the passage really carefully, then cover the text and write out the ideas on your own without looking at it. So a lot of students will kind of paraphrase as they're looking at the text, which makes it really tempting to be very close to what they're saying. So if you read the paragraph, cover it up completely, and then write your summary without looking at it, that will get you much closer to what you need to have, or much farther from the actual original source. Okay, so again, the best way to avoid plagiarism is to read the passage once or several times, cover it up, and write it in your own words without looking. So we're going to try it. What I want you to do is pause the video and read this as many times as you need to until you feel confident, and then play the video a little bit longer and you will get a blank screen. So pause and read until you're confident, and then you can play again. Now, if you will pause the video and paraphrase what you just read. So with this blank screen, write down a summary of what you just read. Okay. And then you can go back a little bit and compare. How did you do? How close or far from the original source were you? Okay. This is another one that you can try. So pause the video and read this over a couple of times. And now that you have a blank screen, give it a try. Summarize what you read, paraphrase what you read. So use these strategies as you're starting to read your article and as you're taking notes in the articles, because it's a great way to avoid plagiarism.